Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. This week we'll be looking at the Gospel passage, which is from Luke 5, which is the calling of the fishermen in Luke's Gospel. And at the end of the miraculous catch of fish, where Jesus kind of instructs people to put the nets in the water and they catch loads of fish, Jesus says to three fishermen, he says to Simon Peter, to James and John, "Come with me and you will be catching people." Come with me and you will be catching people. Now, many years ago, I was preaching on this passage, and it was the first time and only time that anyone has sent a formal written complaint about my preaching. And I was really intrigued about this. I was hauled into my training incumbent's office with a kind of, "You do have a copy of the text which you used on Sunday, don't you, for your sermon?" And I'm like, yes, I do. And we had a discussion. But what had happened is that in my sermon, I had tried to extend the metaphor. So Jesus said to the fishermen, "You will be catching people from now. You will come with me and you'll be catching people from now on," implying not fish. And I had extended this to the church building where we were worshipping, to say, well, actually, we have this amazing resource of all these chairs and this flexible space, and this is what we will be using to catch people. We will be using the chairs, we could be using the chairs to catch people, as Jesus called the fishermen to catch people. Apparently, this was a stretch too far in the metaphor for this particular person who had written to complain about my sermon. But I think it's a really interesting question about how do we preach in a way which is relevant to our congregations. So I was in Bible study this week. We were looking at the parable of the sower, and one of the people there said to me, "Well, this is great. I can now understand the parable of the sower, especially since the year that the field behind my house didn't grow. I really understand that much better. But when I lived in suburbia, I didn't understand anything about sowing. I didn't understand anything about fields. I didn't understand anything about all those sorts of things." And I think that's a really important challenge for us to think, actually, what is it that we talk about in our analogies, in our metaphors, which we are trying to explain things. One year, quite a few years ago now, I had a congregation of people who were aged 55 plus and over. There were about 20 of them, and I wanted to mention something about Strictly Come Dancing. I can't even remember what it was that I was saying about Strictly Come Dancing now, but I asked those 20 people, thinking these are 20 people in the correct demographic to be watching Strictly Come Dancing. None of them had watched it. Not one of those 20 people. And I thought, this is really interesting. How are we drawing from the cultural references that are relevant to our congregations in our preaching? This is important in a rural setting, but in a rural setting, we are often blessed that people understand the rural parables and analogies that Jesus used, sometimes more than people in the suburbs. But it still remains for us a challenge when we are preaching. How do we use metaphors and analogies which are relevant to our congregation? Thought for the week this week is based on Luke 5, 1 to 11, and it's based on Jesus calling the fishermen to be disciples. When Jesus says to Simon Peter, to James and to John, "Come with me and you will be catching people from now on." Come with me, you will be catching people from now on. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about this. What was it about the fishermen? What was it about the fishermen that was going to make them good disciples for Jesus? What was it that he thought that they would do, that they would be, which would be good for them? What transferable skills did they bring to the job of being a disciple? It's a really interesting question about what transferable skills we bring to the church community. What is it that we bring with us to the church community? I guess the fishermen were tough, they were resilient, they were used to being in difficult and dangerous situations, but they weren't used to dealing with crowds, they weren't used to dealing with deep theological issues, they weren't used to all sorts of things, but Jesus wanted them to be with him, to be catching people instead of fish. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to go on retreat somewhere which is near the seaside, and that always makes me think about these issues with fishermen and Jesus. Jesus wasn't a fisherman, but he was forever in a boat or, walking across the lake, all those sorts of things. Maybe it was something to do with that place. Maybe there's all sorts of things about calming the chaos, which was part of that kind of theology for people, that the lake was chaos, and was a whole culture of understanding large bodies of water as being chaos. That's why creation comes out from over the water after all. But what was it these fishermen bring? I mean, on my more whimsical moments when I'm on these retreats by the sea, I kind of wonder whether the fishermen still smelt of fish even when they weren't anywhere near the sea. I mean, they would go back and fish. We hear that when they have had enough, when they can't do it anymore, or when Jesus needs to move from one place or another place around the lake, they do go off. They go off onto the lake, onto the sea. You can't see the edges from the middle of the Sea of Galilee. They go off to the sea and they kind of do their thing on the water. It's a challenge for us. What is it that we bring to our church communities, to the kingdom of God? What makes us good disciples? What transferable skills do we have? We might not be able to catch fish. We might not feel that we can catch people. But what is it that we can do which works for building up the kingdom of God? What is it that we can do which will draw people into the kingdom of God? Maybe we're fantastic with spreadsheets. Maybe that's something that we can do. We can do numbers, we can do things like that. We can think about budgets, we can think about all the roles that a treasurer might have. Maybe we're really good at making a cup of tea. Maybe we can welcome people. Maybe we can encourage people. Maybe we can pray with people. Maybe we can pray for people and tell them that we are praying for them. I wonder what it is that we all have that Jesus is saying to us, saying, you bring your skill, and I will transform it so that you are using it to draw people into the kingdom of God. The Dibley moment for the week this week is something which used to happen in one of the places where I worked. We had a fund which was set up by a lovely lady called Rachel more than 300 years before the time I was working there. And this money was for educational purposes for the children in the village. And what we used this money for was to give each child a book. They'd been able to choose a book out of a range of books, a book that would be an education and a blessing for them. So more than 300 years later, this money left by Rachel was still blessing the children of her village. That's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a week which is full of God's blessings.